We are moving into your house and moving you to a retirement home. My daughter-in-law announced at my retirement service. You don't have any use for this house anymore. The whole place went quiet and I looked at my son, expecting him to say something, but he didn't. I laughed out loud and said, I wish you all the best. That evening, what happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, if you enjoy these kinds of stories, support us by subscribing to this channel. Click on the like button and tell us where you are watching us from in the comments section. Now let me tell you how everything unfolded. Retirement was supposed to feel like relief. That's what they all said anyway. They told me I'd feel lighter, freer, like I had finally set down the last heavy bag after a decades-long walk uphill. But standing there in that banquet hall, with the echo of polite applause still hanging awkwardly in the air and a fake smile stretched across my face, I felt no such thing. What I felt was a quiet dread, the kind that crawls up the back of your neck when you realize the story you've been telling yourself is about to collapse. I had spent 40 years building a career, a home, and a son I thought would be proud of me. I had poured everything into stability, never overspent, never left debts unpaid, never asked for more than I gave. And yet, the moment that should have belonged to me, my legacy, my farewell, was hijacked by a voice I had never particularly liked and now realized I truly despised. We are moving into your house, my daughter-in-law, Chelsea, said, as if she were announcing a change in seating arrangements at a dinner party, not hijacking my life. And we'll be moving you into a retirement home. You don't have any use for that big place anymore. It took me a full 5 seconds to understand what she'd just said. 5 seconds of silence, so thick you could feel the heat of every eye in the room turned toward me. I blinked. My champagne glass hovered mid-air, forgotten. Someone coughed. The pianist stopped playing. I looked at my son, my only child, the one whose college tuition I had covered without blinking, the one whose first car I'd co-signed for, the one who used to curl up in my bed after nightmares and whisper, "You're the best mom in the world." He wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked down at his phone instead, thumbing something like he was bored. Not surprised, not confused, not horrified, just waiting. I laughed. I actually laughed, loud and sharp, the kind of laugh that splits a room in half. Well, I said, and I raised my glass just enough to make a point. I wish you all the best. I smiled directly at Chelsea. You'll need it. Then I took a sip and turned back to the crowd, who had gone from festive to frozen in less than a minute. I finished the rest of my drink in one swallow and walked off the stage, my heels echoing against the polished floor. Behind me, I heard Chelsea's voice rising, saying something about miscommunication and it's already been discussed. I didn't stop to correct her. There was nothing to discuss. The discussion had ended the moment they opened their mouths and assumed my silence was surrender. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the framed photos on the walls. Aaron as a toddler in the sandbox, Aaron at his high school graduation, Aaron holding hands with Chelsea under the blooming dogwood tree in our backyard. Every single image was like a slap. How had I gotten it so wrong? How had I raised a man who could sit silently while his wife announced, like a realtor, that they were taking my home and shoving me into some facility like I was luggage in the wrong room? I'd always thought we were close. I knew Chelsea was cold, transactional, the kind of person who called her mother by her first name and never once offered to help with the dishes after dinner. But I never imagined Aaron would stand by and let her gut me like that. I felt rage boiling up under my skin, rage and something else, something sharper. Resolve. I made 3 phone calls that night. One to the locksmith, one to my lawyer, and one to my friend Beverly, who worked in elder law and knew all the horror stories about families who circled aging parents like vultures. I didn't cry. Not once. Not even when I opened the drawer in the hallway and found the spare key Aaron used to keep on his own ring, now mysteriously missing. They'd already started making plans. Probably months ago. Maybe they thought I'd just go along with it, smile and thank them for doing the responsible thing. They'd underestimated me. They thought I was old. They forgot I was sharp. By noon the next day, the locks were changed. New bolts. Reinforced security on the back door. I sat in my recliner, the same one I'd read Aaron bedtime stories from, and waited. And like clockwork, the phone rang. His name flashed across the screen, Aaron. I let it ring. Then it rang again. And again. The fourth time, I picked it up, curious enough to see what tone he'd use. His voice was sharp, tight with anger. "You changed the locks?" he demanded. "I did," I said calmly. "Didn't think you'd be needing a key to a place that isn't yours." "You're being unreasonable," he snapped. "This wasn't supposed to go like this. You embarrassed Chelsea. You made a scene." I laughed again, but this time, there was no joy in it. "Oh, honey, I didn't make a scene. You did. On a microphone. In front of 100 people. You know what? I don't have time for this. I just lost my shot at the CEO position. I don't need more drama." That was the moment it all clicked. The house wasn't the plan. It was the backup plan. They'd thought he was getting the company. When that didn't happen, they pivoted to me. My home, my assets, my silence. I didn't say a word. I just hung up. Then I blocked him. Everywhere. The next morning started the way most of my mornings did. Slow, quiet, with the kettle humming gently as sunlight poured through the east-facing kitchen window. But this time, there was an undercurrent of something else, a deep, satisfying hum just beneath my skin. I had barely slept, not because I was anxious, but because my brain had been wide awake with a kind of electric clarity I hadn't felt in years. I had spent so much of my life second-guessing my boundaries, worrying about being polite, about being a good mom. But something inside me had shifted at that retirement party, and it wasn't going back. When the locksmith pulled into the driveway, a young man with sleeves of tattoos and a quiet voice, I waved him in with my coffee mug in hand and gestured to the front door like I was inviting him into a new era. They thought I'd just let them take it, I told him as he unpacked his tools. Not today. He didn't say much, just nodded and got to work, but I appreciated the way he never asked why. He just understood that a woman changing her locks is never just about locks. By the time he finished, I had new keys in my palm. Smooth. Unfamiliar, like a fresh start. I watched him drive off, then stood on my porch, staring at the quiet street I had lived on for nearly 3 decades. The maple trees were turning gold, just beginning to shed, and a breeze rattled the dry leaves along the curb. It was peaceful, deceptively so, but I wasn't fooled. I knew the storm was coming, and it didn't take long. By lunchtime, my phone lit up with a series of increasingly aggressive messages from Aaron. First confusion, "Did you change the locks?" Then annoyance, "You could have at least told me." And finally rage, "You've completely lost it." Chelsea's in tears. "We were trying to do what's best for you." Best for me. I wanted to scream. Since when did what's best for me mean stealing my home like it was some piece of forgotten luggage? I didn't respond. Not to the messages, the voicemails, or the emails that followed. It wasn't silence out of spite. It was clarity. There was nothing left to say that would be heard. They had shown me who they were, and I believed them. Blocking Aaron wasn't easy. My thumb hovered over the option for a long moment, my heart racing in that strange, painful way it does when you're about to close a door you once hoped would always stay open. But when I finally tapped block contact, a strange calm washed over me. Not joy, not relief, just calm. Like my body knew I'd done something right, even if my heart hadn't caught up yet. I spent the rest of the day clearing out the guest room, the one I had originally remodeled in case Aaron and Chelsea ever needed to stay overnight. It still had a stack of board games Aaron used to play as a kid and a basket of extra blankets folded with lavender sachets I'd sewn myself. I stared at those things for a long time, trying to understand when exactly love turned into leverage. I had given so much, always assuming that generosity would be remembered, or at least respected. But what I hadn't realized was that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being a person to them. I had become a resource, a title deed, a source of inheritance, a problem to manage. And now that I wasn't of use, they decided to manage me into a facility. That evening, Beverly came by with a folder full of legal printouts and a bottle of red wine. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, reading glasses perched on her nose, and started highlighting sections of the paperwork I needed to update. "You're not the first," she said, her voice low and steady. "And you won't be the last. Adult children think aging means forfeiting autonomy. But you still have every right to make decisions, especially now." I nodded, sipping slowly. "I'm not just protecting the house," I told her. "I'm protecting my dignity." Beverly gave a tight smile. "Good," she said, because that's worth more than square footage. The next morning, I found a hand-delivered letter shoved into the mailbox. No envelope, just a folded sheet of printer paper with my name scrawled in Aaron's handwriting across the top. I hesitated before opening it, my stomach twisting with the familiar cocktail of dread and hope. Maybe it was an apology. Maybe it was an attempt to explain. Maybe he was finally ready to talk to me instead of at me. But no, it was a manifesto of entitlement, paragraphs about how I was acting irrational, how Chelsea was only trying to make things easier for everyone, how refusing to step aside was hurting the family's future. He even had the audacity to say I was risking generational wealth by being difficult. Not a word about love. Not a single sentence that sounded like a son who cared about his mother. Just a man disappointed that the chess piece he'd counted on had moved off the board. I folded the letter carefully, walked to the fireplace, and fed it to the flames. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just watched it burn, page by page, until nothing was left but ash. Then I opened the windows to let the smoke out, breathing in the cold, clean air that followed. There was power in that silence, in doing nothing but standing my ground. And as I watched the wind scatter the ashes into the sky, I whispered to myself, they don't get to decide who I am. Not anymore. It was my sister, Ruth, who finally broke the silence. She showed up on a Thursday afternoon, unannounced, knocking with that familiar rhythm that always made me think of our childhood. 3 short taps, 1 long. I opened the door and found her standing there with a neutral expression and a Tupperware of lemon bars, like she was trying to soften the blow before delivering it. "Mind if I come in?" she asked, and before I could even answer, she stepped past me into the foyer. I could tell by the way her eyes scanned the house, still neat, still mine, that she was looking for something out of place, some sign that the stories were true. She set the lemon bars on the counter, folded her arms, and said, "I heard some things. I wanted to hear your side." That was how Ruth operated. No small talk, no pretense, just the facts. I respected that about her, even when it made me want to scream. I took a seat across from her at the kitchen table and poured us both a glass of iced tea, like we were about to play cards instead of dissecting my humiliation. I told her everything. Not the sanitized version Chelsea was probably feeding her book club friends, but the real, ugly truth. What was said, how it was said, and most importantly, how Aaron didn't say a damn thing to stop it. I could see her trying to keep her face neutral, but by the time I finished, her lips were pursed so tightly they looked bloodless. "Jesus," she muttered, shaking her head. "That's cold. Even for Chelsea." I waited, watching her carefully. "And Aaron?" I asked. "What do you think of your nephew now?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for a lemon bar, picked at the edges, and finally said, "I think he's not the boy we thought he was. And I think you did the right thing." That was the first time I felt a real sense of validation. Not from silence, not from blocking a call, but from someone who had known me my entire life saying plainly, "You're not crazy." That moment gave me strength, but it also left a bitter taste behind, because I realized that not everyone would see it that way. And I was right. That weekend, during my usual walk through the farmer's market, I ran into Denise Langley, an old friend of mine from church who always spoke with the air of someone who thought every conversation was a polite competition. She smiled too wide and leaned in too close. "I heard the kids were planning to take care of you," she said, too casually. "Must be hard for them, poor things. So much responsibility." I blinked, caught between laughter and a scream. "Funny," I said. "They didn't seem burdened when they tried to throw me out of my own house." Denise's smile faltered, and she stepped back slightly, murmuring something about a misunderstanding. But I could already see the narrative forming behind her eyes, one that painted me as the difficult matriarch who couldn't let go. That was the moment I understood how stories get twisted. Not with lies, but with tone, with omission, with the right person framing their selfishness as sacrifice. Chelsea had always been skilled at that, crafting her own sainthood out of other people's silence. And Aaron had learned to follow her lead. I imagined the things they were saying. "She's getting forgetful. The house is too much. We just want what's best for her." It didn't matter that I still managed my own finances, cooked my own meals, shoveled my own snow last winter. All it took was a few concerned looks and lowered voices, and suddenly I was the villain for not going quietly. The worst came a week later when I got a call from Emily, my niece, Ruth's daughter. Sweet, sharp, and always loyal, but still young enough to believe that every conflict could be resolved with a conversation. "Aunt Marlene," she said, her voice tight with discomfort. "Do you think you could talk to Aaron? Just once. I think he's spiraling a little." I asked her what he told her, and she hesitated before saying, "He says you're punishing him for wanting to help, that he was just trying to prepare for the future, and you overreacted." I closed my eyes. The audacity, the sheer nerve of twisting abandonment into altruism. "Emily," I said quietly, "I love you, but your cousin doesn't want to help me. He wants to manage me, like I'm an asset, and he's upset that I refuse to be handed over." There was a pause on the other end. "Okay," she said finally. That's what I needed to hear. The following Sunday, I stayed home from church for the first time in months. I didn't want the stares, the half-sympathetic glances, the quiet murmurs of people pretending not to know what they knew. Instead, I made a list. I started with my lawyer's name at the top, followed by updates to my will, changes to my healthcare proxy, and instructions for who was allowed in my house and who wasn't. I called my financial advisor and had a long, honest conversation about keeping my assets away from anyone who saw me as a stepping stone. Then I contacted a local community group that helped older women with estate planning and living arrangements, not to move, but to volunteer. I wanted to spend time around women who knew how to keep what was theirs. That night, I stood in the hallway, looking at the family photos I hadn't taken down yet. There was Aaron as a child, hugging a teddy bear. Aaron in college, standing beside me at his graduation. Aaron and Chelsea cutting their wedding cake. I stared at those frames for a long time, wondering how many of those moments were real and how many were performances. I wasn't ready to throw them out. Not yet, but I did something small. I moved them all into one hallway. Out of the living room, off the mantle, and into a space I didn't walk through every day. It was symbolic, maybe petty, but it helped. Sometimes distance isn't a boundary, it's a shield. As I crawled into bed, tired but clear-headed, I realized something. This wasn't just about my house. It never was. It was about being erased, replaced, filed away like a photo album no one opened anymore. But I was still here, still thinking, still choosing, and I wasn't going to let their version of me be the last one standing. The first real moment of vindication didn't come from a letter, a phone call, or even an apology. It came from Beverly, again, but this time not in my kitchen with lemon bars and legal forms. It came through a late-night call that started with a long exhale and the words, "You're going to want to sit down for this." I was already in bed, book in hand, but I put it down immediately, sensing something important. "I just got off the phone with a friend of mine on the board," she said. "Aaron thought he had the CEO role in the bag. He's been floating it around town, telling people he was next. They just gave it to someone else." I blinked, stunned. "Wait, he didn't get it?" Beverly laughed, short and low. Not only did he not get it, he was never seriously considered. Apparently, a few of the senior members had concerns about his emotional maturity. "Your retirement party" made its way around. I didn't speak for a moment, not because I was shocked, but because I felt something deeper, a kind of bittersweet justice. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just the quiet affirmation that reality has a way of correcting itself. Actions, after all, have consequences. "Did they say anything else?" I asked. Beverly paused, then said, "They're aware of what happened." The announcement Chelsea made. It didn't sit well with people. Publicly humiliating the outgoing founder of a family-run company? Bad optics. Really bad optics. I sat back against the headboard, letting that sink in. For once, it wasn't just my voice echoing in defense of my dignity. There were others now. Witnesses. And that changed everything. Less than 24 hours later, the fallout hit my voicemail like a hurricane. 7 missed calls. 3 voicemails. The first was quiet. 10 seconds of breathing before Aaron hung up. The second was full of forced calm. "We need to talk, Mom. Please call me back." The third, though, that one I saved. His voice cracked with fury, hurt, and something I couldn't quite name. Desperation, maybe. "You torched everything," he snapped. "Everything I've worked for. Do you even realize what you've done? I replayed it 3 times. Not once did he say he was sorry. Not once did he mention my name. It was all him, his job, his future, his embarrassment. That was the moment I realized Aaron had built an entire fantasy around my compliance. He saw me as a stepping stone. And when I didn't lie down, he stumbled. Hard. But it didn't stop there. A week later, Ruth called again, her voice lower than usual. You need to be careful, she said. They're starting to say things. That you're declining. I closed my eyes. Let me guess, I said. Memory problems. Confusion. Maybe a touch of paranoia. Ruth sighed. Exactly that. Chelsea's been talking to people. Mutual friends. Making it sound like they were just trying to help you before things got worse. My jaw clenched so hard I thought it might crack. That was always the fallback, wasn't it? When control doesn't work, paint someone unstable. It's an old trick, and a cruel one. They can say what they want, I told Ruth. I've documented everything. Every text, every voicemail, every meeting. Let them try. Still, it got under my skin. The idea that strangers might now look at me and wonder if I was losing it. Not because they saw evidence, but because someone planted the suggestion. It's a dangerous thing, how easily perception can be shaped. Especially when it's a woman past 60, living alone, who dares to say no. I started keeping a journal. Every conversation, every interaction, every phone call. Not because I needed proof for myself, but because I didn't trust them not to twist the story again. I had lived too long and seen too much to underestimate the power of manipulation when paired with self-interest. Then one afternoon, I got a text from an unknown number. It simply said, "I'm sorry she did that. You didn't deserve it." No name, no punctuation, but I knew who it was. Lauren, one of the executive assistants at the company, someone I'd mentored years ago. I replied with a simple thank you. That was enough. Quiet truths like that were rare, and I cherished them. They were reminders that not everyone bought the curated version of reality Chelsea and Aaron were selling. Some people still saw me. Really saw me. That weekend, I decided to take back a little more of my life. I bought new curtains for the living room. Bold, burnt orange ones that made the space feel warmer. I rearranged the furniture, moved the TV out of the corner it had been in for years, and hung up 3 pieces of art I had stored away after Aaron once called them dated. It was petty. It was liberating. It was mine. And when I stood in the middle of that room, hands on my hips, heart thudding with quiet pride, I thought, this is what they tried to steal. Not just the house, but the right to choose what it looked like, how it felt, who belonged inside. The next morning, I saw Chelsea's car drive slowly past the house. She didn't stop, didn't get out, but she looked. I stood by the window, not hiding. Let her see. Let her wonder. There was power in stillness, especially when the other person expected collapse. I didn't wave. I didn't flinch. I just watched her go, her tires crunching softly over the fallen leaves, and thought, you thought I'd crumble. You thought you'd won. And you were wrong. Thanksgiving came colder than usual that year. The first frost clung to the window panes like frostbite on a tired hand, and the sky hung low and gray, heavy with the weight of a holiday I used to love. For decades, my house had been the place people came home to. The long dining table with its familiar scratches, the scent of sage stuffing drifting through every room, the familiar rhythm of my hands moving through recipes I could make blindfolded. Aaron had always carved the turkey once he was tall enough, and I'd always handed him the knife like a quiet passing of the torch. But that torch had been dropped, maybe even stomped on, and now the silence of the kitchen was louder than any shouting could have been. Still, I cooked, not because anyone was coming, but because it was mine. My rhythm, my tradition, my grief ritual disguised as cranberry sauce and sweet potatoes. I didn't set the table the same way I used to. No leaf extension, no fancy china. Just a single setting, with the linen napkin I liked best, folded with care beside a thick ceramic plate. I left the other chairs empty on purpose. I wanted to see the emptiness. I wanted to know what it felt like, in my body, to sit in that absence and still choose to stay whole. Because the truth was, I didn't miss the people who used to fill those chairs. I missed who I thought they were. I missed the version of Aaron who used to giggle while mashing potatoes. The one who made me a paper turkey in first grade with his tiny handprint and wrote, "I'm thankful for Mom," in smudge pencil. That boy. I hadn't seen him in years. Somewhere along the line, he'd been replaced by a man who couldn't see beyond his own ambition. And Chelsea, well, she had never seen me at all. Around mid-afternoon, I got a text from Susan, my neighbor across the street. Got extra pie if you want some company. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, to keep the day wrapped in silence and reflection. But I also knew there was a kind of healing that happened in proximity to kindness. I texted back, only if it's pecan. 5 minutes later, she was at the door with a warm slice and 2 mugs of mulled cider. We sat together on the front porch, bundled in coats, watching the neighborhood lights flicker on. She didn't ask for details. She just handed me the pie and said, "Family's a mess sometimes, but pie makes it manageable." I laughed, more out of gratitude than humor. "Amen," I said, and we clinked our mugs together like it was champagne. After Susan left, I walked around the house turning off lights. I paused at the hallway with the family photos again. This time, I took down one frame, the wedding photo. Aaron and Chelsea under the arbor, smiles wide, hands laced together like something out of a magazine. I stared at it a long while before sliding it into a drawer. Not to destroy it, just to put it away. There was no hate in the gesture, only truth. That moment didn't reflect where we were now, and I was done pretending my walls needed to tell a story that no longer fit. Around 9, there was a knock at the door. Soft, uncertain. My heart jumped in my chest in that painful, ridiculous way hope still does even after everything. But it wasn't Aaron. It was Maddie, my granddaughter. 17, wrapped in a hoodie and scarf, clutching a Tupperware in one hand and a wrinkled coat in the other. "Hi, Grandma," she said, eyes wide, voice soft. I told Mom I was going to the movies. I stood there for a second too long, staring at her, trying to match the young woman in front of me with the baby I used to rock to sleep. She looked like both, and neither. "Come in," I said, and stepped aside. She sat at the table while I reheated some turkey and mashed potatoes. I poured her cider and slid the plate in front of her. She stared at it for a second, then whispered, "It smells like being little again." We didn't speak for a few minutes. Just the sounds of fork on plate, the slow sipping of cider, the faint ticking of the old wall clock I'd nearly thrown out years ago. Finally, she looked up and said, "Why is everyone mad?" Her eyes were pleading, not accusing. "Why won't Dad talk to you? Why does Mom act like you're dangerous?" I sat across from her, hands folded tightly on the table. "Because I said no," I told her. "Because I wouldn't let them take something that wasn't theirs to take. And people who expect obedience tend to get very angry when they're met with resistance." She didn't respond right away, just nodded slowly. "I knew something felt off," she said. "They've been acting weird. Like they're trying to make me hate you." My heart cracked open just a little at that. I reached across the table and took her hand. "You don't have to choose sides," I said. "You only have to listen to your gut and trust what you see." She stayed for an hour. We didn't talk much more about the drama. Instead, we talked about school, college plans, how she'd started journaling again. When she left, she hugged me tighter than she had in years. "I'll come back soon," she said, "even if they get mad." I held her face in my hands and said, "You always have a place here, no matter what anyone says." After she left, I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her walk down the driveway, her breath fogging the cold night air. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope, not for reconciliation, but for lineage. Maybe I hadn't lost everything. As I got ready for bed, I turned down the covers, turned off the lamp, and whispered a quiet thanks into the dark. Not for what had been taken, but for what I had reclaimed. My boundaries, my voice, my home. Thanksgiving hadn't been what I'd expected, but maybe, in its own way, it was exactly what I needed. Winter came fast that year, as if the earth itself had grown tired of pretending things were still warm. The cold felt different, not just in the air, but in my bones, in the way silence wrapped around the house at night. It wasn't loneliness, not exactly. It was the aftermath of noise, the strange calm that settles when you stop waiting for the phone to ring or for someone to knock and apologize. I had spent months untangling myself from the idea that being a mother meant endless forgiveness. But boundaries, I had learned, were not cruelty, they were clarity. And sometimes clarity looked like an empty voicemail box and a locked front gate. I no longer flinched at the quiet. I welcomed it, because that quiet was mine. I started volunteering at the local community center twice a week, helping women sort through paperwork they didn't understand or had been told they weren't smart enough to handle on their own. Many of them had stories like mine. Children with sharp smiles and even sharper plans, relatives who confused concern with control. We didn't talk about it outright, not always. But the glances, the hesitations in their voices, it was all there. We understood each other. We were the ones who'd said no when we weren't supposed to, who'd refused to hand over the keys to the very homes we'd built with our own hands. In that space, surrounded by others who had drawn their own lines in the sand, I didn't feel foolish or vindictive. I felt seen. I felt like I belonged. Every so often, I'd hear something through the grapevine. Chelsea and Aaron had moved 2 states over. He'd taken a lesser position at a mid-sized firm, nothing close to the CEO's seat he'd once assumed was inevitable. Chelsea, of course, was still networking, still hosting dinner parties with other women who dressed like strategy consultants and spoke like campaign managers. There was no contact, no emails, not even a passive-aggressive birthday card. And honestly, I was grateful. The silence between us had become a kind of protective glass, transparent enough to remember what was, but strong enough to keep the damage out. I didn't miss the chaos. I missed who I thought Aaron could have been. That's a very different kind of morning, and one I was learning to live with. One chilly afternoon, I had coffee with Beverly in the sunroom, a space I'd finally reclaimed with bright cushions and a shelf of books I'd always meant to read. We were flipping through an old photo album when she asked, casually, "Have you thought about updating your will again?" I laughed, but the kind of laugh that had teeth. "Yes," I said. "They don't inherit the house. Not anymore." She looked at me carefully. "That's a big move." I nodded. So was trying to evict me at my own retirement party. I had given that choice more thought than almost anything. Not out of anger, but out of truth. Inheritance isn't just about property. It's about legacy. And I would not hand my life's work to someone who treated me like a stepping stone. Instead, I updated everything. My estate was now divided among several causes I cared about: the women's shelter, the literacy program, a scholarship fund for first-generation college students. Maddie would receive a trust, accessible when she turned 25, with a clause that required a letter explaining what she planned to do with it, not as a test, but as a gesture of intention. She had shown me something neither of her parents could muster: grace without expectation. When she stopped by during Christmas break, she helped me hang lights, baked gingerbread cookies with far too much cinnamon, and curled up next to me with her head on my shoulder. She never asked for money, never asked me to forgive Aaron. She just showed up. That was enough. One day, while I was pruning the garden in early spring, a car I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. My chest tightened automatically. Old habits, hard to shake. But it wasn't Aaron. It was a woman in her 40s, wearing a navy pantsuit and holding a clipboard. "Mrs. Colburn?" she asked. "My name's Angela. I'm from the state's Adult Protective Services." My stomach dropped, but I kept my voice steady. "And what brings you here today?" She hesitated, then said, "We received a wellness concern. An anonymous report about possible cognitive decline. Just doing a routine check." Of course. I smiled, tight and practiced. "Come in," I said. "Let me make you some tea." I answered every question. I showed her the paperwork, the bills, the calendar, the medication schedule neatly written and pinned to the fridge. I gave her Beverly's number and even Susan's. She stayed for an hour, left with a polite smile, and never returned. It was infuriating, but also clarifying. That final move, trying to weaponize the system against me, was the nail in the coffin of any lingering doubt. It didn't matter if they thought they were right. They weren't safe. Not for me. And I was done pretending otherwise. Months passed. Seasons shifted. I planted marigolds in the front yard and hosted small dinners with friends who always brought dessert. I started writing letters to Maddie, not just for holidays, but just because. I began to feel the weight of my solitude as something different, earned. There's a power in standing alone, not because you have to, but because you chose not to kneel. Now, when I walk through the house, every corner tells my story, not theirs. not the version they tried to rewrite. Mine. The furniture is where I want it. The walls are painted the colors I love. And the silence? It's no longer a wound. It's a boundary made of brick and memory and resolve. And if the doorbell rings again one day, years from now, if Aaron ever finds the nerve to stand on my porch and ask to talk, I'll listen. I won't slam the door. I won't scream. But I also won't hand him a key. Because what he wanted wasn't connection. It was control. And what he lost wasn't just a house. It was the right to say he knew me. Have you ever had to choose self-respect over family ties? What would you have done if your own child tried to erase you from your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your story. If this one struck a nerve, don't keep it to yourself. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real-life stories about betrayal, boundaries, and finally putting yourself first. See you soon in the next one.